this is another film where all the content, it's meant to be just for entertainment. It's meant to be lighthearted and comic and fun. But I guess it just depends on how you feel about violence in terms of how much it entertains you. This is a very violent film in terms of the content. Like if you were to look at the content and break it down, the assessment is it's very violent. But in this setting, it's supposed to be funny and entertaining. So personally, I'm finding it a little bit difficult at the moment, and more difficult these days, to enjoy gun violence. In light of recent gun crime, I'm finding it a little bit hard to sit and watch big kind of comic gun shootouts. So, I mean, you know, it's probably not fair. This film has arrived in a time where gun conflict is, you know, one of the center points, one of the strong headlines in our news at the moment. But anyway, I just wanted to mention that because I found it did affect my enjoyment of this film a little. So yeah, the gun theme is very heavy in this film. There are a lot of shootouts, and what often happens with comedies when it comes to violence, and it certainly happens in this film, is that despite the massive gunfire that happens in the film, it's fairly victimless. So, you know, there's one scene which takes place in a workplace and the building is shot up and you see things flying everywhere and there's a lot of people present, but no one seems to get hit by a bullet. So that's a good thing in terms of, you know, it's not squeamish or unpleasant to watch, but at the same time, I don't know, it just made me feel a little cold, you know, the workplace shootout and something I didn't like about it. But anyway, I just wanted to bring it up because it's an area of sensitivity I feel at the moment in our media. So yeah, so lots and lots of gun violence and fairly victimless, if you like. You do see, you know, that there have, you know, been injuries and deaths happen through the film, but it's not a big theme, if you like. Most of the violence, other than the gun violence, happens very much one-on-one or, you know, groups kind of beating each other up. There's a lot of beating up going on in this film and all the kind of different levels you can imagine of fighting. So everything from like roundhouse kicks and that kind of martial arts style fighting to being hit with objects and throat grabbed. There's a fair bit of throat grabbing in this film and just, you know, being attacked basically in order to try and attempt being restrained. So the other sort of, I guess, side of, you know, what we'd call the violence is in terms of the humiliation. The film actually opens on a really humiliating scene where someone is humiliated quite badly and quite unforgettably in front of a lot of people. And this is actually what sets up the tone for the entire film. And of course, and it's meant to be, this is quite mean-spirited, this little event. You know, but again, we live in an age where we try very hard to focus on bullying or anti-bullying, and we try and send out a very clear message about bullying. So in this sense, it's quite amusing, but at the same time, if this is something which affects you, then this might be a little bit uncomfortable rather than funny. So the bullying theme is quite strong. In fact, towards the end of the film, it becomes quite a heavy theme, this idea of anti-bullying and being nicer to one another. And the things that we can say to one another in high school, you know, sometimes those things are quite hurtful, even if they're not meant to be hurtful, although in this film it stresses that, you know, people do intend to hurt. Some of those people never change, and some of the victims of those comments carry those with them for the rest of their lives. So it does make that point very strongly by the end of the film. So I guess that sums up the violence. There is a lot of it. There's the gun violence and also the kind of fist fighting, one-on-one sort of stuff quite frequently through the film. There's a bit of blood and gore as well. Probably the biggest scenes of gore is there's a repeated scene where someone blows up, let's say, and you see a huge amount of blood spatter and gore kind of thrown on some glass. And yeah, as I said, the scene is shown a few times, so you get this idea that someone has basically kind of erupted, if you like. There's a couple of other scenes which are a little bit bloody. One of them is a throat is kind of torn open, and you see a man holding someone else's trachea. So I guess I'd call that fairly gory. Again, it's meant to be funny. This is for comic effect, not to gross you out, although it will. So yeah, and there's this kind of stuff where people have obviously sort of been shot, and there's a bit of spatter. One man is shot, and you see that the blood spatter from being shot sort of up the wall and on the floor near him, and you'll see a wound on the neck area. So you do see a little bit of wounding, but as I said, most of the violence appears surprisingly fairly victimless. So on to the sex and nudity. There's no actual sex scenes in the film between characters, but there's quite a few sexual references. One of the strongest ones, there's a few references to pornography in the film, and in one scene a man opens a video and there's some, I guess you'd call it it is pornography, which is going on in the screen, but it's not people having sex. It's, you see the back of somebody thrusting, but they're clothed, and you see someone else wearing some quite skimpy bondage gear, doing a bit of I don't know what you'd call it. It's not really a dance. It's a bit more of a, I don't know what you'd call it. Maybe leave me a comment if you can think of a word for what this guy's doing in his little bondage pants. And same with nudity. There's a few scenes where you see a man fully nude from the rear and from the front. When you see the front view, it's from a distance and the genitals are obscured, so you don't actually see anything, but you get the very clear picture that this man is completely nude. And in another scene, a man strips off completely naked. Again, you only see from the top, so you understand that he is nude, but you don't actually see any genitals or anything like that. So yeah, as I said, there's the sexual references and a bit of sort of sexual themed kind of banter in the film, but the pornography, and there's another scene when someone's handed an iPad to look at something and they say, oh no, that's actually, there's pornography, can you show me what you really meant to show me, sort of thing. So yeah, porn is just mentioned again in that scene. Alcohol and drugs. There isn't any illegal drugs used in the film. There's a bit of alcohol. I think it's champagne, beer, spirits and shots, and one scene takes place in a bar. Again, it's another fighting scene. So as I said, the fighting's fairly frequent in the film. And finally, onto the swearing. Yeah, there's a fair bit of swearing in the film. F words and S words and A words, and bitch or son of a bitch, I think, is there. There's obscene finger gestures and that sort of stuff. But the other thing I did want to mention in terms of, I guess, what might be considered offensive language is there's a lot of race jokes in the film. And personally, I find this quite refreshing, because I think it's good to be able to laugh at ourselves and laugh at each other in a positive way, to make fun of each other. And I do appreciate the way Kevin Hart is very specifically and distinctly making light of his colour. It's good to be able to laugh, I think, at colour rather than get us upset or offended. And of course, in this film anyway, it's meant to be funny. Likewise, there's quite a few jokes about height and weight. Again, they're meant to be funny. This is Kevin Hart, after all, that we're talking about. So there's a few race themed jokes and also height and weight jokes in the film as well. But overall, as I said, the tone is light. It's meant to be fun. I certainly wouldn't call it a kid-friendly film, but so it's not one I'd be taking the kids to. But it is good fun, and I think, as I said before, we live in difficult times where there's a few things in the news media which can make us quite sensitive. So it has arrived in some ways at an unfortunate time, because gun culture is something I personally find uncomfortable to see on the screen at the moment, particularly those kind of victimless mass shootouts. But at the same time, I think we need comedy and a laugh more than ever. So I think if you kind of go into it looking for the enjoyment and willing to enjoy it, then you certainly will. There is a more detailed breakdown, of course, of the film on the website, which is cinemum.net. But before you go, please take a moment to subscribe.